Back in the 19th century, the United States went through this incredible, dramatic transformation, pushing its borders clear across the continent. But here's the thing. This expansion wasn't into some empty, untouched land. It was a push into a world that was already home to hundreds of nations. And it led to this profound and, yeah, often tragic collision of worlds. So today, we're going to break down how this whole westward movement reshaped America and forever changed the lives of American Indians.
So, here's the big question we're really digging into. Why? Why did the American West, this land of just immense beauty and promise, become such a violent battleground? What was really going on that made conflict seem almost inevitable?
And the answer, when you get right down to it, is both incredibly simple and unbelievably powerful. It all boils down to one thing: a young nation with a ravenous, unstoppable appetite. An appetite for land, for resources, for growth, and it was all being fueled by this powerful new economic engine that was just firing up.
All right, so let's start with that engine, the thing that was driving this whole movement. We're going to look at what set this massive migration in motion in the first place, this incredible force called industrialization, and the almost magnetic pull it created toward the West.
See, industrialization wasn't just something happening in factories and cities back east. To power that brand new economy, America needed a staggering amount of natural resources. We're talking timber, minerals, and huge, vast tracts of land for farming and ranching. And guess where all of that was? The West. This created an absolutely irresistible pull, a powerful reason for Americans to pack up, move out, and try to find their fortunes. And that, of course, leads us right to our next point. Because when these waves of settlers and miners and railroad builders started pouring into the West, they didn't find an empty frontier waiting for them. Not at all. They ran right into hundreds of distinct American Indian nations who had lived on and cultivated and revered that land for centuries. A collision, well, it was basically unavoidable. And this collision wasn't just one single event. It was a series of really brutal flashpoints that came to define the whole era. You had the long, grueling Plains Wars. You had the absolutely stunning victory for the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But you also had the absolute tragedy of the Wounded Knee Massacre. Each one of these marks a critical, painful moment in a decades-long struggle for control of the West. And these things didn't just happen in a vacuum. You can actually see a clear escalation over several decades. As more and more Americans settled in the West, the pressure on American Indian lands and their entire way of life just grew and grew, which led to more and more violent confrontations. Now, it's really important to get this. The displacement of Native peoples wasn't just the result of random fights between settlers and tribes. It was actually formalized and sped up by official United States government policy. So let's take a look at how this was all systematically done. The government basically created this two-pronged approach. On one hand, you had the Homestead Acts, which gave Americans a huge incentive to move west by offering them free land. Then, at the exact same time, you had the reservation system, which was designed to confine American Indians to specific territories, often on land nobody else wanted, to clear the way for that settlement. And then the Dawes Act took it even one step further, trying to completely dismantle the whole idea of communal tribal ownership by breaking up their land into individual plots. The stated goal was assimilation, but the result? It was a systematic, legal framework for taking land. So, faced with this just overwhelming pressure, what do? Well, American Indian nations responded in different ways, and this led to two major paths, which were often happening at the same time: a desperate fight to preserve tradition through resistance, and the forced adoption of American culture through what was called assimilation. And these two paths, wow, they could not be more different. On one side, you have this policy of Americanization. It was often carried out through really brutal means, like the Indian residential schools, where kids were taken from their families, their hair was cut, and they were forbidden from speaking their own languages. But on the other side, you see a powerful response, like the Ghost Dance, a spiritual movement that just swept across different nations, offering a vision of cultural revival and a hope to preserve their identity against this overwhelming loss. So, after all this, what's the ultimate takeaway from such a turbulent period? Well, the consequences of this westward push weren't temporary, not by a long shot. They created a lasting legacy that continues to shape the lives of American Indians to this very day. It really became this vicious cycle. You see, the continued settlement by Americans just intensified the conflict. which in turn gave the government more reason to reinforce its policy of forcing American Indians onto reservations. It was this self-feeding loop that just kept going, with absolutely devastating consequences. And so the final, undeniable result of this entire process, from industrialization to conflict, government policy, was this: the profound and permanent displacement of American Indians from the lands that they had called home for generations upon generations. And that leaves us with one last, really crucial question. Because this isn't just history that's stuck in a textbook. The treaties that were signed, the land that was taken, and the policies that were enacted back in the 19th century, they all created legacies that are still with us today. You see it in ongoing debates over sovereignty, land rights, and cultural preservation. So the real question for us is, how do we see the echoes of this history in our world right now?